Hi everyone, and welcome back to the channel. I've talked about many strange tram stops and strange train stations on this channel, but there's one thing I have yet to talk about: Melbourne's strangest train line. This is the Stony Point line. It runs from Frankston in the north to Stony Point in the south, and it doesn't really know what it wants to be. It's listed as a metro service on their website and on the map, but it operates with diesel sprinter trains from V-Line and with V-Line drivers. It also has by far the worst frequency on the metro network, with trains only every few hours. So why does this line exist? How is it still around? And what will happen to it in the future? Let's find out. The Stony Point line operates with sprinter trains from V-Line. These are single carriage trains built in the 1990s that can be coupled into sets of up to 6 cars, although it never gets that high nowadays. With most lines now operated by modern VLocity trains, today they are relegated to just the Seymour and Stony Point lines. Trains on the Stony Point line have their toilets locked, permanently displaying toilet engaged. There is still a water tap though, but it doesn't taste very good. Stony Point trains usually operate as 2 car sets, however at certain times of day, the train will decouple in order to run a more frequent service in the peak direction, with the front carriage running to Frankston first, followed by the rear carriage about half an hour later. The Stony Point line is the only passenger line with regular service that is entirely single track, even including V-Line. There's not a single passing loop, so trains can only run in one direction at any given time. The stations on the line are also incredibly barren, and I don't think there's any that demonstrate this as well as Baxter. This right here is your average Stony Point line station. A very short platform, pretty much nothing here. It's too short for any train longer than 2 carriages. The first section of the Stony Point line opened in 1888, from Frankston to Baxter. The line was fully extended to reach Stony Point the following year. Even from the early days, trains always ran as a shuttle from Frankston, and since 1889, the line has barely changed, aside from a few infill stations at Leewara and Morridu, as well as a short-lived branch line to Red Hill. The line was not electrified with the Frankston line in 1922, continuing to be run by steam locomotives until the mid-20th century. The only way to get to this station is this gravel track next to the shopping centre. The platform is so short, it means trains longer than 2 carriages are just unable to use the station, and it's no surprise it's the least used station on the entire Melbourne network, with only 3,000 boardings per year. Pretty much every station on the line looks like this. Leewara, the first stop on the line, is supposedly there to serve the Monash University Peninsula campus, although with frequencies like this, barely any students actually use it, with even the busiest stop, Hastings, having less than half as many passengers as the least used station on the electrified network, Wattle Glen. The final station, Stony Point itself, serves as an interchange point with the Phillip Island Ferry, which departs Stony Point after each train service en route to French and Phillip Islands. There's really not much here at Stony Point. Today, Stony Point is the only suburban line operated by diesel trains. But it wasn't always this way. There used to be diesel branch lines to many other nearby towns, such as Healesville, Warburton, Whittlesea, Mornington, and Gembrook. Over time, these lines were closed as they didn't bring in enough patronage to justify keeping them open. Some of these were later restored to form tourist services. This is the case with Gembrook, which is now Puffing Billy, and Mornington. The Healesville line is under progress of being restored to Yarra Glen, and this will likely open in a couple years' time. So why didn't Stony Point close with all these other lines? Well, firstly, it had more patronage than the other lines, passing through many well-populated towns. But the biggest reason was the Long Island steel mills. Starting in the 1960s, daily freight trains began operating to and from the factory near Hastings, meaning this line had a use beyond simply passenger services. Despite this, the line was still close to passengers for 3 years in 1981, being reopened in 1984 following a change of government. These daily freight services still operate. Today, the Stony Point line is in pretty poor shape, with small stations and a frequency so low it's practically unusable for the people who live along the line. So, what can we do to fix it? And what does the future look like for Stony Point? Well, the first thing we'd need to do is increase frequency. This can be done quite easily by building a passing loop at one of the middle stations, like Tyab or Somerville, adding an extra platform. This would allow frequencies of roughly every 40 minutes, which still isn't great, but much better than what we have currently. From here, though, we face another issue. The Sprinter trains that currently run services here are starting to get old, being originally built in the 1990s. While we can definitely get another decade or so out of them, beyond there the future is quite uncertain. Now, a bit of an issue arises, as we have no newer trains like the Sprinters that are 2 carriages or less. The best option we have is the V-Line VLocity trains, which are 3 carriages. In order to run these, you'd need to extend every single platform on the line, which certainly isn't ideal and doesn't really improve service that much for the residents that actually use it. The more ambitious option would be to electrify the line, which would also require the platform extensions mentioned previously, as well as duplication of track to Stony Point, and potentially some new stations being completely rebuilt. This could function as an extension of the Frankston line, and would provide 10-minute frequencies on modern trains to residents. The issue with this is of course the cost, and also whether it's worth it over another project such as building a line to Mornington, although it's certainly the much better option over using velocity trains. What will happen to the Stony Point line in the future is still a mystery, and this is likely to be the case for a while. As improvements continue for the electrified network, with higher frequencies, new trains, and level crossing removal projects, Stony Point is left behind, barely ever mentioned. It's awkwardly placed on the same website right next to Melbourne's other major train lines, with frequencies of 10 to 20 minutes, and it feels wildly out of place. It's a common joke in the transport community that Stony Point is immune to mass disruptions. Almost every time there's a major disruption facing most other train lines, Stony Point is never affected, because it's just so isolated from everything else. Either way, it can't stay like this forever. One day, Stony Point will be duplicated. One day, it will be electric. The real question right now is when. Thanks for watching.